Vice President J.D. Vance no longer traveling to Switzerland for negotiations today with Iran, raising questions about the next phase of talks between the two countries. The White House cited difficult logistics for negotiations in announcing that this trip was being postponed. The Swiss Foreign Ministry also said today's planned talks between the U.S., Iran, Qatar and Pakistan would be pushed to a later date. Now, earlier yesterday, the vice president briefed reporters at the White House on the tentative deal with Iran, staunchly defending the agreement through a series of often misleading claims. Vance, for instance, asserted that lifting oil sanctions on Iran was, quote, not a new benefit for the country. Although, as the New York Times pointed out, under the preliminary deal, Iran will be able to sell its oil for more and to a wider array of buyers. Vice President also claimed the financial benefits for Iran will only be available if the country fully complies. But the agreement states the U.S. will unfreeze Tehran's assets and release restricted funds upon the implementation of this MOU. Here's more of what Vance had to say.
The simple fact is that the only way the Iranians get any of those resources, not a single penny, by the way, from the United States of America under any circumstances, but the only way that they would ever get any benefit of the bargain is if they comply fully and change their behavior. And so you really have a win-win situation for the United States of America. If the Iranians don't change their behavior, their military and their nuclear program is still destroyed. The Obama nuclear deal allowed enrichment. Ours will not. The Obama deal allowed the accumulation of stockpiled weapons-grade material. Ours is actually leading to the destruction of that stockpile of enriched material. So there are many differences. The Obama deal gave them over $1 billion of American money. This deal gives them $0 of American money. So a lot of substantive differences, but I think the most important differences are where we're coming at it from a position of strength and the fact that our Gulf Coast partners love this deal.
So the administration is already on defense, but let's talk about some of the partners in the Gulf, because the reaction in the Middle East is no more important than when we look at Israel, who's reacting with alarm to President Trump's preliminary agreement with Iran. And critics across the political spectrum are calling it a major setback for Israeli security. Again, according to the New York Times, Israeli officials and analysts say the deal leaves key war goals unmet and does nothing to curb Iran's ballistic missile program, its support for proxy groups like Hezbollah and the Houthis, or its long-term nuclear ambitions. All of those are kind of kicked over this 60-day period down the line. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu struck a cautious tone, pledging Iran will never obtain a nuclear weapon and insisting Israel will maintain its security interests and adding additional challenges lie ahead. Yesterday, Vice President Vance pushed back against Israeli criticism, warning leaders in Jerusalem not to turn on their strongest ally.
You have seen people within Bibi's cabinet who have come out and attacked the deal and in some ways very personally attacked the President of the United States. And I guess my message to them would be twofold. Number one, Donald J. Trump is the only head of state in the entire world who is sympathetic to the nation of Israel at this moment in time. And he happens to be the head of state of the world's superpower. If I was in the cabinet of the Israeli government, I might not be attacking the only powerful ally that I have anywhere left in the entire world.
Meanwhile, in a continued threat to the newly signed peace deal, Israel's military says its forces struck targets throughout southern Lebanon overnight. Lebanese state media reports at least 16 people were killed in Israeli airstrikes. Israel said 4 of its soldiers had been killed in the fighting there, including a lieutenant colonel. An explosive drone attack hurt another 5. Also yesterday, Iran's supreme leader issued his first reaction to the tentative agreement. In a statement read by state media there, the leader, who's not been seen still in public since being wounded in the strike at the start of the war, seemed to authorize direct talks for his officials with the U.S., but added face-to-face discussions do not mean, quote, acceptance of the enemy's position. The supreme leader also added he believes President Trump signed the deal, quote, out of desperation. So many pieces for us to follow here. Retired CIA officer Mark Polymeropoulos, also an MS Now national security and intelligence analyst, thankfully is here on set with me. So, Mark, let's start with the fighting between Israel and Hezbollah. This was always going to be a sticking point. It was mentioned early on in this 14-point memorandum of understanding. And now we are seeing new tensions, new fighting ignited overnight as Vance is postponing going to these talks. What should we make of all of this?
So, Ali, a lot of us, when we saw the MOU, and of course the details were leaking out, in the days prior, and we saw this notion that Lebanon was going to be linked to it, the demand for a ceasefire, almost an Iranian demand that Trump administration agreed to.
Yeah.
And here's where it's problematic, because as you've seen over the last several hours, fighting has exploded there, including the deaths of several Israeli soldiers, which is going to be a big issue within Israel. But the bottom line is Israel's fighting Hezbollah. It's a terrorist entity. And let's just remember that before 9/11, before al-Qaeda, that's a terrorist group that had killed more Americans. So Israel actually has the right, in my view, and many others, and across the Israeli political spectrum as well, to be protecting itself, its northern borders. But now we're at a really kind of strange inflection point in which the vice president gets up in front of the world stage, and he's actually talking like a very left-wing progressive.
Yes.
Is that New York Mayor Mamdani speaking? Is that AOC really criticizing Israel? And so we're at a point in which it's almost that the administration is taking the side of the Iranians and Hezbollah, and the Israelis are kind of in this apoplectic meltdown across the Israeli political spectrum, because they really are not used to seeing, especially a Republican speaking like that.
Well, especially after Bibi Netanyahu had lauded President Trump so repeatedly and so consistently as one of the best presidents toward Israel in history. Now, of course, you come to this moment, and this is something that you and I forecasted at the very beginning of this Iran war, was the U.S. and Israel were working in tandem then, but their interests would diverge. And now we're seeing that very much written down on paper. And when you look at this MOU, I think it's striking the way that I didn't see anything directly dealing with proxy groups, other than mentioning that fighting in Lebanon needed to cease. And so when you even just take that one prong of what is usually a multi-pronged approach to U.S.-Iran policy, what does it say that this issue is being largely litigated as, OK, Israel's just got to stop in Lebanon and we'll deal with the rest later?
So, Ali, no proxy groups, which, of course, was the Republican talking point lambasting Obama's JCPOA. Yes. So put that out there. That is rather shocking as well. And the other point, too, is what about the key issue of the ballistic missile program? And then it comes out where President Trump and even J.D. Vance basically are saying, they can have some missiles, no big deal. Again, everyone kind of is taken aback, because the maximalist positions that Trump was espousing seem to, he's walking all of these back. And it's just feeding this notion of an agreement which is really very much like what? The JCPOA. Is it JCPOA 2.0? Or others are actually saying it's worse. And those voices are coming from the Republican side.
I even remember asking Congressman Seth Moulton when he was on Morning Joe a few weeks ago, hey, most Democrats actually supported that Obama JCPOA. Are you not supporting it now because it's Trump? I mean, the contours of this are similar. And what he said to me was, I think it's the fact that we've had 10 years of being pulled out of the JCPOA, and now we're coming back into it in a worse position to have negotiated it, and in a worse position where Iran has been able to become emboldened over the course of those 10 years. It's also why you're starting to hear a little bit more focus on where to place the blame as Republicans try to look at the Trump administration and figure out where their North Star is on this, because this deal sort of erodes a decade of talking points on U.S.-Iran policy. You have Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth scolding NATO allies yesterday, calling their hesitancy to assist the United States in the war with Iran shameful. Hegseth repeated President Trump's claims that the alliance is a paper tiger and warned that U.S. support to NATO would not be a one-way street. He told allies that the Pentagon will conduct a 6-month review of troop levels in Europe. 2 diplomats told the Washington Post the Pentagon will also cut the number of fighter jets, reconnaissance drones, and warships that it would activate for Europe in the case of a war or crisis. Meanwhile, the Wall Street Journal has new reporting that the Pentagon needs $80 billion to cover costs from the Iran war, as well as other non-war related bills. That's what Deputy Defense Secretary Stephen Feinberg told lawmakers in phone calls this week, according to sources familiar with the discussions. And it all comes as multiple Democratic lawmakers yesterday called for Secretary Hegseth to resign or be fired for his leadership during the war with Iran, accusing him of strategic incompetence. Among them, Democratic Congressman Seth Moulton, a Marine Corps veteran and member of the Armed Services Committee, who even went a step further, calling for Hegseth to be investigated for potential war crimes, referring to a U.S. airstrike on a school that Iranian officials say killed at least 175 people. And the president, when he was asked about that strike, sort of brushed it off when he was finishing up at the G7. But I wonder what it says. It doesn't take much for Democrats to say that they want Hegseth out of a job. That's been the posture at almost every turn of controversy. And yet it makes me wonder, after a conversation with our colleague David Rode yesterday, if Hegseth isn't one of the people that ends up drawing more attention for the role that he played, the advice that he was giving to the president during this Iran war and the deal that ultimately resulted.
Well, it should. And of course, when things go wrong, people are always going to look for individuals to blame. And don't forget, Hegseth would get up in those press briefings at the Pentagon. I would call it, fancy kind of happy math. Basically saying everything was incredible, everything has been obliterated. It turns out that is actually not the case. And so, look, when things go wrong, people are going to look for individuals to blame. One of the amazing things we saw yesterday, and I was talking actually to some in the MAGA movement who actually supported the war, so maybe older kind of foreign policy conservative Republicans, and they are putting blame on Hegseth, also on J.D. Vance, and in fact they're calling this Vance's MOU. So you can see how they're trying to protect Trump, but you can see how, look, things are not going very well right now. And let me just throw one other thing out there. I always have to say this, Allie. I do some math on my own. 157 days ago was January 13th. What was that? That was the day in which President Trump told the Iranian people help was on its way. And nothing in the MOU talks about the Iranian people. In fact, we seem to be strengthening the regime. That's something that I think I fight for myself and many others. It's hard to stomach.
Yeah, and I think for, again, neoconservatives and conservatives who have long held this view that we need to take a tough posture toward Iran, initially celebrated what was happening with the president going in, starting this conflict, and now are questioning what was it all for? Did we do enough to try to pressure them to the table? And are we ending up with a regime that is only more emboldened in a region that feels only more volatile? We're going to ultimately see what happens with Vance. Does he go? What does the next phase of these talks look like? But for now, retired CIA officer Mark Polymeropoulos, always a joy.
Thank you.
Thank you.